Hello everyone! I've shown you 3 games from the Champions Showdown, and all 3 games were played between Magnus Carlsen and Ding Liren. And I'm very surprised none of you suggested any games from the other matches. So I decided to show you one game. It was played between Fabiano Caruana and Alexander Grischuk. And, well, the result is quite interesting in their match, as like Carlsen and Ding Liren, they both played 4 matches, like 4 mini matches. So one was the first match was 4 games of 30-minute chess. Then I believe it was 6 games of 20-minute chess. Then 8 games of 10-minute chess and 12 games of 5-minute chess. And in the first section, in the 30-minute chess, the result was 2 to 2. In the 20-minute section, the result was 3.5 to 2.5 to Grischuk's favor. And in the 10-minute section, the result was 4 to 4. So in the first 3 sections, Alexander Grischuk actually took the lead. But then something very unexpected happened. Well, unexpected to me. I thought if Grischuk would shine in any section, it would be in the blitz section. I mean, after all, he's quite a blitz player and he was the world blitz champion. But unexpectedly, Caruana took this section with 8.5 to 3.5. So, and in the end, winning the match. But the game I decided to show you was from the 10-minute section. It's quite an interesting game, a really tactical game. Both players really go all out, so I do hope you enjoy it. Caruana has the white pieces and he plays e4. We have e5, knight to f3, knight c6, bishop to b5, knight to f6, d3, now bishop to c5, and it's interesting, this bishop to c5 line of the Berlin seems to be becoming a usual thing in big tournaments, and the player with the black pieces seems to be achieving some nice victories with this line. Knight to c3, Grischuk castles, now bishop captures on c6, d captures on c6, and knight to e2. Rook to e8, h3, knight d7, maybe preparing f5, g4 is played, bishop to b4 check, and now Caruana plays the very interesting king to f1. He doesn't go for c3, that's interesting, he goes for king to f1, and now this bishop does look funny on b4, so okay, no problems. Grischuk immediately plays bishop back to f8, knight to g3, now this knight has some really nice outposts on f5 and h5, knight to c5 and bishop to e3, f6, knight to f5, and we have knight to e6. It seems like a good idea since this light square bishop isn't really doing anything to capture this powerful knight on f5. But if you capture it after g captures on f5, you opened up the g file for this rook on h1, and also now white is controlling the e6 square, which will be a good square for this knight. For example, knight should jump to e6, and then he can choose to go either d4 or f4. So instead, after knight to f5, Grischuk goes for knight to e6 immediately. Rook to g1, king h8, getting the king out of the rook's way, and now h4. g5 here could be a bit premature, as black could just ignore this and push g6 to kick away the knight. So after king h8, h4 was played. Now g6 with an attack on the knight, knight to h6, queen to e7, queen d2, c5. It's a nice move. It really secures the d4 square for the knight. It's preparing b6, and the bishop will obviously be developed on b7. Rook to g3, b6 now, preparing to develop the light square bishop, king g2, preparing to get the other rook into the game, bishop to b7, and now rook to h1. Rook 8 to d8, developing, and h5 now. Bishop captures on h6, and here the expected response would be bishop captures on h6, of course. But Caruana goes for h captures on g6 to open up the h file and immediately go for the attack. Here we have bishop captures on e3, and what do you do here? Well, you can't capture the h pawn with the rook to win the queen, because after you capture, the queen will capture it, there's no more checks, and then you will lose your queen on d2. So, f captures on e3, and now knight to f8 to protect the h7 pawn. We have g5 now, knight captures on g6, g captures on f6 with a tempo on the queen, queen captures, and knight to g5. Again, Caruana is threatening to capture on h7. So rook to e7, defending, rook to f1 now, with a tempo on the queen, queen to g7, and rook back to h1 now, again threatening to capture on h7. Queen to g8, now the rook is again protecting the h7 pawn. Queen to e2, preparing queen to h5. c4 now, breaking open the center. Rook to h6 first. Now queen to h5 will be more powerful. C captures on d3, c captures on d3, and rook to d6. And the Caruana now goes for it. Queen to h5. He doesn't mind giving up the d3 pawn because it seems like it's a poisonous pawn. You know, white does have a lot of pieces surrounding the black king, but the pawn really isn't poisonous. And Grischuk smells this and captures it. Rook captures on d3, and it's interesting. What do you do here? There is an interesting line. You know, some of you might think that knight captures on h7 is winning for white. For example, rook captures and then rook captures on g6, and now black is getting either checkmated or he loses the queen. The problem with this is after you play knight captures on h7, black doesn't recapture the knight. Black plays bishop captures on e4 with check, and after you move the king, the simple rook captures on h7 now is completely winning for black. Because the bishop is now protecting the knight on g6, and there is no rook captures on g6 anymore. So after rook captures on d3, Caruana doesn't really have a move here. He has to wait. King g1, getting the king away from this bishop to e4 check. Rook to d6, rook to g2 now, rook to g7. We have queen to g4, knight to f8. Now the knight is pinned, it can't move. Rook to h5, protecting the knight. Rook d to g6. Now Grischuk is owning that g file. Queen to f5. We have knight to d7. King to h1, getting the king away from any checks if the rook does capture on g2. Knight to f6 with an attack on the rook. We have rook to h4, and now knight captures on e4. And what do you play here? Nothing really for you to play. You can't capture the knight. If you capture it, you lose to rook captures on g2, and white has no more moves. So after knight captures on e4, Caruana tried one last idea. He played knight captures on h7, hoping that Grischuk will capture the rook on g2, and then Caruana will have some discoveries. But unfortunately, Grischuk played knight to g3 with check, and in this position, Fabiano Caruana resigned the game. The king is in check, the queen is forked. You can't capture the knight because it's pinned from the bishop on b7. So the white really doesn't have any moves to play here. If you play something like queen g1 after knight captures on f5, yes, you do have some discoveries, but none of the discoveries really work. Whatever you play, knight g5 check, simply knight captures rook, and it's game over. So yeah, a great game by Alexander Grischuk, and a great performance against Fabiano Caruana, an almost 2800 player. I believe he's 2797 at this moment or something. Winning in the first 3 sections against a guy like that is quite impressive. And like I said, it took me by surprise that Caruana managed to win 8.5 to 3.5 in the blitz section. But that's chess, you know, things happen. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. And one more thing, I'm really running out of quotes to put on top of my board. So if any of you have any interesting quotes, you know, maybe that only exist in your country, or maybe they're not very famous, you know, feel free to share. I will share them with everyone. So yeah, thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon.